I'm Joshua Bardwell, and you're going to learn something today. Today you're going to learn something about the GPL. If you've noticed that this is not my usual recording environment, that's because I'm stuck at the airport. So as long as I'm sitting here in an empty airport in the middle of the night, may as well make a video. And the video I'm going to make is about the GPL. I made a statement about the GPL in a recent video about my assertion, let's call it an assertion, that someone had violated the GPL. Who could it have been? And I would like to talk to you a little bit more about the GPL and about why I made that assertion. Let's start by just talking briefly, and I will be brief, about what the GPL is. The GPL is a license that lets people, generally software developers, do certain things with code. It lets them use other people's code, modify it, add to it, and publish the works that they make with that code, but it puts certain conditions on them. It'd be like if you said, hey buddy, can I borrow your car? I need to get to work tomorrow. And I said, okay, but only take it to work. Don't take it anywhere else. By agreeing to that, you get to use my car, but you're bound by certain restrictions. And the GPL is the same way. Whenever someone uses GPL code, in other words, by copying the code, by taking the Cleanflight project, for example, and forking it and turning it into Betaflight or Raceflight, one of the requirements of doing that is that you agree to be bound by the GPL. So the GPL is it always goes forward. You can't sort of get out of it. If you use any GPL code in your project, you have to also make your project be bound by the GPL. So I say all that because I want to be absolutely clear that there's no debate that Cleanflight, Betaflight, Raceflight are all bound by the GPL. Okay, and the developers agreed to that at the moment that they forked the project instead of developing it from scratch. If you don't want to be bound by the GPL, develop your project from scratch. In other words, if you want to drive wherever you want, you go get your own car. But if you want to use my car, then I get to say what you can do with it. And that's, for example, what Felix did when he developed KISS, and it is what the Raceflight developers did when they developed Raceflight 1. At least that's what they say, and there's no indication that that's not true. So in case you're wondering, is this all about Raceflight 1? This is not all about Raceflight 1. This is about the old style Raceflight, which was forked from Cleanflight or Betaflight. I don't know exactly which one it was forked from, which was bound by the GPL. One of the things that the GPL requires is that people who get access to the binaries, the executable binary files, also get access to the source code. GPL feels very, very strongly that everyone should have free and unfettered access to the source code so that they can modify it if they want. And the people who wrote the GPL are very, very suspicious, paranoid even, about commercial entities trying to weasel out of the GPL, trying to get the advantage of using other people's code without fully living up to their obligations. And so one of the things they've said is that if you distribute executable code that is derived from a GPL project, you must also distribute the source. And it's very, very unambiguous about this. And there are all kinds of rules about how you can distribute it. And this is
Attention, please. Airport security alert. Please maintain control of your bags at all times. Report any unattended baggage.
And the specific thing that they're accused of having done is that when they closed the GitHub repo to public access, but continued to distribute binary files via the Slack room, it's alleged that put them in violation of the GPL. And they've made all kinds of arguments. Preston, I say they, but it's really Preston who is the sort of mouthpiece for the project, has made all sorts of arguments about why that's not the case. For example, he says that you can distribute compiled binaries, you don't have to include the source code, you can allow people to request the source code and you have to give it up. And he has said something like, and this is not a direct quote, but it's from memory, he said something like, people asked for the code and several days later we opened up the repo and all good. And I'm going to show you why I don't think that's true and why I do in fact think that they were in violation. Because here's one of the other requirements of the GPL. All code that is GPL bound by the GPL has to include the GPL in itself. So if you look at the web page we're looking at right here, this is the Raceflight GitHub repo. This is the code that they were distributing, and in that code is the license, the GPL v3 license that they were bound by. So there's no ambiguity that these terms apply to this project. It says if you want to give people the code in a non-source forms, in other words, an executable file or a bin or a hex file that you flashed to your flight controller, and this is what the Raceflight guys were doing when they were giving out the bin files or the hex files over on the Slack room. They say you may do it in one of these ways. So these are the only ways that you can convey an executable file, a non-source file of a GPL project. Let's see what they are. 1, you can convey the code in or embodied in a physical product like a CD or a USB key, and the executable or object code is accompanied by the corresponding source. In other words, you put the bin or the hex file on a USB key or a CD, and you put the source on the same key. Okay, that is one thing you can do. That's not what they did, because they were not distributing it on a physical medium. They were distributing it. It was my recollection of the time is that it was an uploaded file in the Slack chat room, and you would download it just by going to the files section of the Slack chat room. B, you may convey the object code in or embodied in a physical product like a CD or a USB key, accompanied by a written offer, valid for at least 3 years and valid for as long as you offer spare parts or consumer support for the product model, to give anyone who possesses the object code, in other words, the bin or hex file that you flashed to your flight controller, to give them a copy of the corresponding source for all the software in the product, yada, yada, yada. In other words, if you are giving people your code on a physical device and for some reason you don't want to include the source code with that device, like maybe it's really massive and you can't fit it all on a CD, and you're like, okay, look, if you want it, we're going to give you a slip of paper that says if you want it, send an email to this address and we'll send it to you. Something like that. Okay. Again, that doesn't apply because they were not giving out their code on physical media. Now, Part C is a little bit weird. Part C is essentially a subset of Part B, and Part C doesn't apply because they weren't doing Part B. We'll just skip right past that. Part C would only come into play if they were doing Part B, and they weren't. Part D is the one that I think they were most closely doing. You may convey the object code by offering access from a designated place, like a Slack chat room's file download section, and offer equivalent access to the corresponding source code in the same way through the same place at no further charge. So they weren't doing that because at the time that they were distributing binaries in the Slack chat room, the GitHub repo was closed. There was no public access to the source. As far as I know, if that fact is incorrect, I will set the record straight, but that's my recollection of what was going on at the time. So it seems like in as much as I can get a straight story, and the story has changed many times, so that's a little hard to do, but in as much as I can get a straight story, most recently, what Preston has said is we were not in violation because we were complying with our obligation to make the source code public by responding to the request for access to it by opening up the repo. But that is that's trying to combine parts B and part D in a way that, by my reading, the GPL doesn't allow. If you are conveying the code on a physical object, then you may also accompany it with a written offer to make access to the source. But since they were not conveying it, the idea that they were responding to requests doesn't comply with the GPL. So in order to comply, what they would need to have done, I believe, is provided a link to the GitHub repo or some equivalent, like a zip file or anything for those bin files. Oh, and by the way, GPL requires that you make access to the source for every single binary that you distribute. So every single, BB327, BB574, BB, all of the binaries that they rolled out as they were developing, they would have needed to include access to all of those things. And now you start to see why everybody who does the GPL more or less uses GitHub or something like it. Because GitHub provides that automated way of every time you produce a binary, somebody can go to GitHub and they can pull down the source of anything that they want. So that sums up why I believe and I assert that they were in violation of the GPL. When the GitHub repo was closed, there was no other access. From the time when the GitHub repo closed to the time when they opened it back up again, there was no other access to the source. They were distributing the binary without providing access to the source in the exact same location where they were distributing the binary as required by Part D here, which is the only part that is consistent with the way they were distributing the binary. And since they did that, the fact that at some point they opened up later in response to requests, that's not how GPL is written. And as Preston said to me today, there's law and there's law, and the contract says what it says, and you have to do it. I agree. Now, you may not care about any of this, and if you don't care about any of this, I'm surprised that you've watched this far. If you do care about any of this, you can go and you can read the whole GPL yourself. The designers have gone really out of their way to make it as clear well, not exactly concise, but to make it as clear as possible what you are and are not allowed to do under the GPL, because they want people to comply with the GPL, and they are really, really paranoid, as I said before, about unscrupulous people trying to abuse GPL code. So you can just go read this. It's not complicated legalese, and it's not even that long. You can decide for yourself if you think that the claims that you're hearing about why they were not in violation are true. I am not an expert on the GPL, but I can read, and it sure seems to me like there's only one way to convey non-source code that is consistent with what they were doing, and they were not doing what they were required to do under Section 6D. That's all for now. Hope you've enjoyed my studio, and thanks for watching. Happy flying. Not that this has been much about flying. I would like to be flying home today, but I have a feeling I'm going to get home really late or end up in a hotel. Oh well, happy flying. Bye-bye. Oh, hey, one more thing. I'm turning off the comment section of this video, not because I want to squash discussion and all, but because I don't want... Everybody has their own opinion about this, and you can have your opinion. I don't want to talk to you about your opinion. You can agree with me, you can disagree with me. I've said my piece. I think it's pretty clear. Read the GPL yourself. Make up your own mind. I don't care. But I was accused of expressing an opinion that wasn't based on anything. I'm not an expert on the GPL, and what gives me the right, and, well, I can read and think, and that gives me the right as far as I'm concerned. But if you wanted more, here it's been. Bye-bye.